Hey, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Congratulations, first of all, on the years of the show running, with Kim's Convenient and now Run the Burbs. And I know that there's a plan to release here in the US with Run the Burbs. So congratulations on all this great work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's exciting reconnecting with the American community because they were so supportive of Kim's Convenience. I remember coming out there and it just like blowing up. And it was the summer of Asians, as they dubbed it, because it was Crazy Rich Asians, and then Kim's Convenience came to Netflix in the US, and it just popped.
It's like
And
perfect
so
timing, right?
yeah, it was perfect timing. I love that two projects is the summer of Asians. And so it's been a joy making this show, and people have been so excited to see it, which is like people are just excited to see it, but especially the Vietnamese community, because I can't name another sitcom that is centered around a Vietnamese family and then a Vietnamese South Asian family, right? And so I'm so excited to bring this show to the US. It's coming to the CW starting at the end of July on Mondays. And it's a wild moment to think that they're going to turn on the TV and watch a Vietnamese family doing their thing in the
It's
suburbs.
crazy. It's amazing. I'm so proud of what you've done. You know, well, let's take it back. When did you discover that you were funny?
I don't know if I ever like, I don't know if I, oh, that's tough. I think it was probably with big family gatherings. And so if we'd be celebrating that or like a birthday, someone's birthday, there'd be like big family gatherings. And so on my mom's side, she has 13 siblings.
Wow.
So you gotta think, man, we had some big family gatherings. And my cousins and I would always do skits, and I loved making jokes. So I think that was kind of like the starting point. And then um as I went into junior high and high school, I think like I was much more of like the class clown type of vibe to it, you know? And so I think that's when I discovered it. But like discovered wanting to be funny and being
Yeah.
funny are very different things.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think many times when we run into comedians, we think that they're automatically funny, but it's not what we think. It's a very technical thing that you do on stage and on screen. It's not that you are funny all the time and you're on all the time. Yeah, that's what I've learned by being around a lot of comedians.
Yeah, like I remember when I started doing improv comedy in high school. And that's when it went from something I enjoyed and something that was a bit of my personality into like something I wanted to hone and follow up on. So I started doing improv comedy in high school. I joined a theater in Calgary where they trained performers for free, and I wasn't very good. Like I didn't have a comedic voice. And it took a lot of years for me to find my voice and who I was. And I say that because like when you look at Asian comedians, there wasn't, for me at that time, there wasn't like a pathway to get somewhere. At least now we have like so many Asian comedians that we can look up to, and they are the best of the best. But back when I was starting out, it was like I would say like Russell Peters, coming out in the early 2000s. But even
Yeah.
like, like that was early Russell. And so um finding my voice, finding who I was. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to perform to do improv and to fail repeatedly over and over again,
Yeah.
to find my voice.
I listened to some of your interviews, and 4 years of failing is sort of like what you kind of described as your early days. But what keeps somebody going I mean, for most people, getting through a year or two of failing and knowing that you're not good, admitting that you're not good, but 4 years, what do you think kept you going and saying, I want to pursue this journey?
That's a good question. It's very good. I think I started when I was 16, 17 when I started. So for the first year or two, it was from sheer like something to do. It was like something to do with my friends. And when we graduated high school, I was still doing it, and when they stopped going, it was just me, and it was tough. Like I wasn't good, and I wasn't getting stage time, and I think the artistic director of the theater wasn't wasn't giving me the opportunities I wanted, and I pushed through, and I think for me it's because I felt like I could get better, and I just needed to like keep working at it. And I think it's a bit of like that. I have like a really addictive personality,
Yeah.
and I wasn't going to stop doing it until I figured it out. And so when my friends stopped going, and it was literally just me at that point, because I started with like seven of us. There were seven of us. All of us were Asian. They called us the Asian invasion. And when they stopped coming, in theory, I should have stopped going, but I went because like I just wanted to get good, and I really enjoyed it. And like I loved like seeing good performers and then figuring out what they did well and how I could steal what they had and put it in my tool belt. So I think it was like at the beginning, it was like sheer stubbornness. And then when I was getting a bit of success, it was like from this drug of
Yeah.
getting laughter on stage. Um, and that's what kept me pushing through. And so I think also because I was going to university for a degree in economics and business, and I just needed something that grounded me,
Mm.
that wasn't school. And improv was that. Improv was the thing that wasn't school or wasn't my job. And I think that that always stimulated me in a way that I just kept wanting to do. So yeah, that first 4 years was rough, man. Like it was a lot of failures.
Yeah, and I can imagine when you're going through something like comedy and you're going through the journey of like learning this stuff, and you think that you don't have the talent. How do you? It's like it's mind-boggling to me how you keep persevering and going. I'm not getting staged. I'm not getting called up to the stage. I'm not. The artistic directors are not asking me to do, and just gets weighing down on somebody's soul. And did you see a glimmer of hope and saying, I can get better. I am improving.
Yeah, there were glimmers of hope always. There'd be like if I had like a month of like I wasn't playing or I didn't get a lot of shows, there'd be like a show where I did okay,
Mm.
and that little high kept me going. It's funny because I just watched Joyride last night, and this isn't a spoiler, but there's a scene where one of like the white kids in her class was just like, oh no, we're like kind of making fun of her for her Asian background, and her best friend comes up and was like, "You don't have to prove anything to these people." And I remember when I started doing improv, I had a best friend who was white, and he said, "You know, Andrew, like, are you trying to be an actor? Because there's no funny Asians who are actors." And I feel like that always propelled me to like, I'm gonna prove that guy wrong. I'm gonna prove him wrong, to the point where I saw him a few years ago. We're not friends anymore, not for that, but just for like, growing up. But he saw me. He's like, "Hey, I'm really proud of you, man. Can you please stop mentioning me in interviews?" Because like, it's like every interview is like, you mention me, you don't say my name, but you always mention me as the guy you're trying to prove wrong. And I'm like, I need that, man. I need that motivation. Um,
You're doing it
it's
right now.
hard. I'm doing it now, man. I'm doing it in the US now. Taking it international. I I love comedy. And I would watch SNL and fall in love with the idea of spontaneity and risk taking, and like Will Ferrell, just his characters were always on the edge of chaos, and I love that. And when I had that success on stage in Calgary, a very white city, I it fueled me more. And then when I was getting more and more success, and after shows, audience members would come and be like, "Hey man, great show, Andrew." Or there'd be rumblings of people being like, "Oh, I hear there's a really funny Asian guy." Listen, so I'm like, oh shit, am I the funny Asian guy? All right, okay. Call my friend up. Do you hear that? This is the funny Asian guy. That's just me. There's no other Asians here. It was like this thrill. And so that propelled me. And um, when I finished university, I didn't think there was a career for me in comedy. So I tried to work like a 9 to 5 job, but comedy kept pulling me closer and closer, and I just needed to be able to make that career. And thankfully my parents encouraged me to do so.
Oh wow, that's a very novel thing for what
Yeah.
They encouraged you. What do you
Yeah.
think was in their minds to say, we're going to like take a risk and go off the edge, off the program book here, and encourage our son to do something so risky?
Yeah. Well, so I graduated university in 2006. And between 2006 and 2009, I was the director of a nonprofit organization. And that was really helpful because I got to, like, my hours were really flexible and I got to make a good living and I was hustling improv gigs and hosting. And so the thing for me in Calgary, the really helpful thing was like, I wasn't in a Toronto or Vancouver, or the equivalent in the US would be like an LA or New York, because Calgary, you didn't do improv in Calgary to make it. You weren't an actor to make it. You did it because you love it, which but also means the pool is much smaller. So I was chasing like hosting. That's what I was doing. Chasing hosting, emceeing, commentating,
Mm.
creative writing. I emceed the Calgary Stampede, which is like big giant rodeo, but I emceed like the cool stages, where they didn't need me to dress up like a cowboy. And so I was able to supplement my income and build a career out of this.
No.
And also with my parents, I didn't like, I get asked a lot from kids of immigrants, and they're just like, how did you bring it up with your parents? And I think I'm like, I always do this. I'm like, I didn't tell them what I was doing until a little bit later. Like, I didn't say I was doing improv. I just said I was like gonna go out with my friends. And they didn't care as long as I was in school and not breaking the rules. And I wasn't doing any of that. So when I invited them to their first improv show, I was like 22,
Mm.
23.
They weren't worried.
And 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 I was about 5 years into the game. So when they came to the improv show, it was sold out. It was sold out because Andrew Phung was playing tonight, right? And so they would hear buzz of like people, oh, they're like, my mom and dad were like, they're here to see you. And I'm like, yeah, they know I'm playing tonight. It's been promoted that I'm in the cast tonight. That's exciting to them. And I would always introduce them to the crowd. I would do a scene based on their life. I would get a suggestion from my mom and dad, and my mom and dad loved it. But because I included them in on the journey and they saw me a little bit later on the journey, they're like, oh, Andrew's good. He's got this. So by the time 2012 rolled around, I was like, I've been thinking about quitting my job and going after the arts full time. And mom and dad like, do it. Go for it.
Wow.
Go for it. Because they saw that I was making a living emceeing events. And I always say to people, like, I'm always like very blunt with numbers, because it becomes a numbers game. And I always say, what do you make at like a good job in 2012? And I'm like, well, if per paycheck you got $2,000 every 2 weeks, so 4,000 a month, that's a pretty good job,
Yeah.
right? Well, in 2012, when I was emceeing events, I would get 750 to 1,500 per emceeing gig. I could do 2 to 4 events a month, 2 to 4 days a month. That's a salary I made at a job,
Wow.
right? Then I have all those other days to chase other things. And I was like, I booked like a little role, like a non-union television show that shot twice a week, $700 a day for an entire year and a half, right? So it's like, once you add that up, I made what I was making at a job. And so my parents aren't worried. So when I quit my job to go after this full time, they were good with it. And then when I started producing my own improv shows. And so on a good weekend, after 2 shows, after paying everybody, I could clear 2,500 from 2 shows. That's like the dream, right? So
Yeah.
like, if you bring it down to a numbers basis, it was like my parents were like, you're good.
I heard in an interview that you kept a spreadsheet, and
Yeah.
there was, yeah, this idea of if you were making more than, your day job, and you were
Yeah.
bringing in more with your art and your emceeing and your comedy, then you're good to go. And I could see clearly how that kind of thinking really can make parents feel at ease, because if they know that our son's thinking about that on a practical level and he's actually clearing it and he's successful at it, why not?
Yeah. I hacked the game, man. Like,
Yeah.
parents like want you to work smart. And so I showed them the Excel spreadsheet. I literally open it up today. Like, I have one until now. Like, and I use it to like track my year. And I still do it just like because it's like this safety net of understanding what my year looks like. And then I also do it because I'm like, ooh, you know what? This month is like open. And it used to be this month is light for money, but now it's like, oh, this month is open, I can take time off. As opposed to before, it was like, ooh, this month is light, I gotta work harder. It's funny that like the roles have turned now to where I am in my career. But yeah, I use this Excel spreadsheet. I still use it. I tell people, I'm like, that is the ultimate motivator. I approach my arts career and my comedy career like a business. And so I'm so thankful that my parents encouraged me and pushed me to have like a proper education. And so by having that, I'm able to use it for what I do in my day to day, how I organize time. Like even right now, like I have a paper calendar. Like, and that's just the habit that I saw my father do. My father had a paper calendar always open on his desk for like the metal shop and where he was supposed to be and who he had meetings with. He was always constantly doing paperwork to get ahead of the game. And so approaching my arts career like that was really helpful. It helped me understand what I needed to do. Because I think sometimes there's a pitfall of like you book a gig and it pays like X dollars. You're like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But on the grand scheme of things, you're not good. Like, you know what I mean? Like you need to match what you're making at a job out in the world. And so I'm really grateful for that.
But before we get into Kim's Convenience and landing that role, when you're out in the gig economy and you're a comic or you're hosting and you're doing all these things that people are paying you a few $100, how do you look at your spreadsheet and go, you know what? I have some openings here in this month. I'm just going to go out and land more stuff. How do you manifest that sort of thinking? How do you go out and go, I'm going to land a few more things? I mean, that's not typical of what I hear with artists because, we're already thinking like we got to be creative. We got to like live in this. You're actually saying, no, 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 no. It's like a sales job. You're going to go out and find more slots to fill so you can make more money. How did that come about?
I think it's that. Well, I think that is a little bit of the Vietnamese coming out, is it not? Because like, I don't think you'll meet a Vietnamese aunt or uncle that isn't constantly grinding out a career, right? And so I think that's seeing my parents. Like my dad will always talk about how for him it was always chasing more contracts and more opportunities. Seeing my parents do that made me the way I am. Working with my dad for 2 summers in his metal shop. And I told my wife the other day, I'm like, I almost lost a finger. She's like, you almost lost a finger? And it's because it came up because my cousin Chan, he worked there like, 5-6 years earlier when he was a teenager. And he wasn't paying attention, and this machine came down and cut off his finger. And then so my cousin Kian had to like get the car, put Chan in, get the finger on ice, rush to the hospital so they could reattach the finger. And I remember I like was falling asleep at this machine because you're doing like 10,000 grinds. And I fell asleep. I was like falling asleep and it clipped down on my finger. And like I woke up and I was like, oh, and thankfully there wasn't much pressure. So it was just a cut. So yeah, like I almost lost a finger. So that's going to motivate you to go out and always be grinding it out. But for me, I think this is where improv really helped, because improv, when you're on stage with your partner, you're always like looking at what are the options here? Where's my like choose your own adventure?
Yeah.
So for me, I've always been really good, and it's because of improv, of like thinking outside the box and like finding ways to hustle and grind. So for emceeing, it was going to Chamber of Commerce events and meeting other business owners and finding out like, hey, oh, you're a brewery. Hey, do you need someone to MC an event for you coming up? They'd be like, you know what, Andrew? Yeah, we got this like launch we're doing for a new brew. Why don't you come down? How much you charge? I'm like, $500. So like $500 for sure. Right. It was also hosting a lot at Loose Moose. So Loose Moose is like a name in Calgary. So if they were looking for a host or person, they'd come to the theater and be like, oh, Andrew, do you want to host this? I'd love to. And then from there, when you do a good event, you can get 10 other events, because people who go to events probably work at other companies. Like, hey, can you come do this? Andrew, we're hosting a chicken wing eating competition. You want to host it? Hell yeah, I want to host a chicken wing eating competition. My favorite is Andrew, I'm a best man at a wedding. Can you help me write the speech? Hell yeah, I can help you write a best man speech. You owe me $300. Cool, right? And then that became a little side hustle. So it just was like everything in life presented an opportunity, and I'll pounce on it. So if I see there's an opportunity to work with you, work for you, do something, and if I learn about your business and be like, hey, how can I help with that, right? Then I would do it. So it's really just like with improv, you see every possibility. So whenever I interact with others in the world, it was just like, oh, this is how I could work with you. Let me sell this. You might not take it now, but you might take it later.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of that, you know, immigrant mentality of just going out and trying to find work.
And saying yes to opportunity, not being afraid
Yeah.
to say, yeah, I got this. You go for it.
Well, that's the tenets of improv. Yes, and right. So saying yes and to something, yes, and adding on to it, and you know what'd be great, like the science center in Calgary did this adults night, and I remember going to one, and it was great. But I'm like, this event needs an MC, so literally reaching out to the person who organized it. And I asked the front desk, I'm like, who organizes this? And they're like, oh, this is their name, just their contact. Great. Emailing them cold and being like, hey, I went to one of your events. If you ever need an MC, I noticed that there's some bunch up and the staff weren't equipped to like handle people going to and from exhibits. And there are some questions about schedule. I'd love to come down for the day and MC one of your evenings. I MC'd that for 4 years. That was a monthly gig that paid $700 every last Thursday of the month. I did that when I was on Kim's Convenience season 1 and 2 because I didn't want to turn down the money. Because in my mind, I'm like, it's $700 for 3 hours. Like, and so when I gave up that gig, like it was tough. Like I was like, oh man, like I don't need it anymore, but like it's $700, you know? And so yeah, just like you got to look for every opportunity to go after it. And so it is a business approach. And I do understand that sometimes like if you're an actor or performer or comedian, it's not like it isn't the most artistically fulfilling, but it's genuinely really fun. Like I had a lot of fun doing it. And I will say, working the Calgary Stampede that first year, I did it for 4 years. That first year, 10 shows a day for 10 days, you get really good at emceeing. Like you
Yeah.
get really good really fast.
You know, we watch you on Kim's Convenience or Run the Burbs, and we see this character, but who knew in order to get to just the tip of the iceberg, you have all this experience with just being out in the world, emceeing and giving your vibration, your thoughts, your who you are. You've had plenty of practice doing this publicly. And then so by the time we see this on screen, we're like, damn, this guy just made it overnight in the last 5 years, right? But this is we don't have a Vietnamese comedian in the United States, on TV, having a TV show about the Vietnamese family. But we have a lot of comedians in the United States, and arguably our community of Vietnamese Americans are massive. But we get this guy out of Calgary who's a Canadian. Now we have him on US TV. That is an amazing thing. It's just a beautiful thing, Andrew. And I can't tell you how much, how awesome that is. How did you get to Kim's Convenience? And how did you think that it would affect your life when you went into the audition?
I was doing a show at the Edmonton Fringe Festival. The Fringe Festival is like a theater festival and comedy festival where it's like new works or like smaller works. And I was touring an improv show called Kill Hard. And Kill Hard was an improvised action movie based on an audience member's life. Wow. We'd interview an audience member, and then we'd pull something from their life and turn it into an action movie. And we had like 10 fight scenes choreographed. So we would just like whisper fight 2 and go into fight number 2. And we would sprinkle it in. We always had a car chase choreographed, And after the show, Ins Choi was in the audience. and Ins Choi was the creator of Kim's Convenience. And he waited after the show and he's like, "Who are you, man?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm Andrew Phung." He's like, "How come I've never seen you?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"I'm not really part of the theater world, the improv comedy world." And he's like, "I got a show called Kim's Convenience, a play." And I was like, I know Kim's Convenience, the play." He's like, "I'd love for you to audition for it." Okay. So then, like 4 months later, I get a reach out to my agent. And I had an agent like very loosely, like an agent who just booked me in some commercial auditions every now and then, like real light stuff. She's like, "Yeah, you got this audition for for the show." I'm like, okay. So I sent in a tape, didn't hear anything for a month. I didn't get it. Month later, "Hey, we want to fly you out to Vancouver." Okay. Free trip to Vancouver. All right. Go to Vancouver, audition in front of the team. Didn't hear anything for a month. I'm like, I didn't get it. Get an email. "Andrew, they want to bring you to Toronto for a chemistry read. You need to negotiate your deal now." So we negotiate my deal. I go to Toronto, free trip to Toronto. The night I land in Toronto, I go do an improv show because I needed to stay warm and I would lose my mind in the hotel room. Go audition the next day. First scene is with Simu Liu.
Mhm.
I remember the script was a Kimchi and Jung scene, and it was like Jung was chasing Kimchi around. And I just tried something because I'm like, I'm gonna be a loose cannon, improv in me. And as he was chasing me, I started doing jumping kicks and then shouting karate over and over again, and then pretending to hit him. And then we went back into the scene, and I said, "Kimchi knows Jung would beat him up, but Kimchi would never run because they've been friends since they were kids. Kimchi would fight you and lose. He'd rather fight you and lose than run away from a fight." And it was something I discovered. And then I did a scene with Paul Sun Young Lee. And again, I went the opposite. And Paul told me this afterwards. The scene was them at the toilet bowl, and every actor hid their laugh when Appa said ball cock. And when he said ball cock, I just started like laughing. And Paul was like, "You're the only one who did that." So I kind of went against the grain, but like I went with my instincts. And then a week later, I found out about Kim's Convenience, and I was so excited. But I was unsure of how big this show was going to get. So I moved to Toronto for 6 months to make the show. My family was in Calgary, came back, didn't know how big the show was going to get. Got renewed for season 2. And then we're like, oh, then we went on a tour across Canada and we saw how big the show got. And that was massive. And so I knew it was going to be life changing. I just didn't quite know it was going to be this much. And so I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
And while this is all going on the last, those 5 years, do you do stand up? Do you do other gigs that are, that support a different type of art, within the comedic space?
Yeah, like when I was filming season 1 and 2 of Kim's, I was still doing my monthly hosting gigs, my weekly improv shows. I was still doing like 4 shows a week. Um, from season 1 and 2. And then season 3, I was still performing weekly. And so yeah, like I honestly, like, my schedule hasn't really changed. I don't do weekly improv shows anymore, but I still do improv. And I don't do weekly improv shows mainly because I'm so busy, right? I'm
Yeah.
doing a show Friday. I'm doing a show this Friday. I'm very excited about it. Um, and it's with Colin Mockery, and like, so like it's wild now that like the people I get to play with are like these people that like I looked up to for so long. They're my peers that I think are so incredibly talented. But yeah, like in my job is still the same. Like every day I'm still hustling and grinding it. But like my hustle now is like emceeing gigs like I that are in the country that I travel around for. I get booked a year in advance. Um, I'm hustling my TV show. Like now my day is reading scripts for my show, writing, executive producing, reviewing cuts, going through edits, listening to music. Like it's still the same. It's just the size, the scale of the work is even bigger now, right? And that's what I love. Like my career has progressed in this way that I wanted it to. I'm just doing bigger projects now.
Canada and the US are very, very similar cultures,
Mm.
but there are differences. Now, your comedy and comedy in the US, I'm sure that there's like these small nuances that are different. But is it in your sort of DNA and your mindset to say, in order to really do the big breakthrough, you got to come through in the United States one day and break through here?
I don't think it is for me because that was never the goal. Like the goal for me was to do improv shows and make a good living. And like I feel like I've accomplished that.
Yeah.
So for me, everything's just gravy now. And I've never I don't think I ever needed to succeed in another country. I just need to succeed in like my local community. And the really cool thing is that by doing that, I've been able to succeed. Like whenever I go to the US, like I was in New York last month, and like everywhere I went, just was like, hey, you love your show, man. You kimchi? Like people just stopping in the streets. And I'm like, I'm not talking like one or two. It's like literally everywhere we went. Every subway, every corner, people stopping. And New Yorkers are blunt. Like one guy just came out to me real aggressive. Like, hey, I like your TV show. You're real funny. Walked away. I was like, oh, thank you. You know? And so success in the US wasn't the objective, but it's definitely an outcome I will take because I'm so thankful for it. And with a show like Run the Burbs now, to be able to make a show that is spotlighting things that happen in a Vietnamese household makes me really proud, you know. Like in the first episode of season 1, the pilot, I say "trời ơi" like very early, and I remember right away the tweets of people coming in being like, "Whoa, Andrew Phung just said "trời ơi" on network television," right?
Damn, what a moment.
And you know, and that's a moment. And
Yeah.
so, or we did scenes where I'm speaking in broken Vietnamese, Vietglish, you know, because that's how I speak it. People being like, "Hey, Andrew's accent's on point there." Like that's how the second generation speak Vietnamese. And then people being like, "Oh, damn, Andrew Fong wasn't Korean. He's Vietnamese." And Vietnamese. And I was like, yeah, man, the swerve, right? Like that's real confusing. And I'm like, but when you let us work, you give us good work, we do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's been an honor to do this. And as the show goes on, it becomes a bit more and more Vietnamese because like I think in the first season I was kind of like discovering just how to make a show and then seeing what kind of stuff landed. And when we made season 2, I'm like, all the Vietnamese lands, just let's go with it, right? And so it's been a really cool experience.
Would you ever move to the US because of the opportunities in entertainment?
I don't know. I always have to think about my kids and my wife. So moving from Calgary to Toronto was a decision we made together. It was during season 3 of Kim's Convenience. I had rented a house. We all went out for like 3 months just to like see if we liked it.
Yeah.
Everything I do will have to be a decision we make as a family because I don't want to take my kids somewhere they don't want to be or that will reduce their happiness because everything I do now is for their happiness.
Right. Right.
You know, and so I don't want to go somewhere where they're miserable so that dad can have more opportunities. I also think the way the world is now in a post-COVID world, the world is a bit smaller because of Zoom, because you and I are able to do this over the internet. So I've had great interaction with the people in the US. Like I think most of the projects that reached out to me this year were from the US. There was like a handful of projects that reached out to my agent directly to be like, hey, is Andrew Fung interested in this? And so that's exciting. But I think Kim's Convenience showed the US like, hey, he's up here. Just give him a ring.
Yeah.
They just call my agent. I'm like, yeah, what do you got? Let's do it. And there was one that was shooting in Vietnam, which was so exciting. Like, so it was shooting in Vietnam, and my parents were going to be there at the same time. So part of my thinking was like, if I say yes to this, I want there to be a day that I know where my parents are, and I walk into the cafe and see them like, hey mom, how you doing? And just for my mom to lose her mind, right? I didn't end up doing it because the scheduling didn't work out. But it was definitely like I was like, ooh, this it's worth doing just for this.
Yeah.
That I booked a project in Vietnam. But yeah, I think the world is a bit smaller now because of post-COVID world. It's so easy to connect to people more than ever. We've had to become resilient that way. But look, I met with my agent this morning, and we're planning a trip into LA in December to do some meetings, and so it's always on the table. But I'm very happy with the freedom and flexibility I've had in Canada. I'm so proud of that. That the our national broadcaster has ordered a show about a Vietnamese Indian family and has just given us free range in what we do in regards to this. In season 2, I cannot wait for you to see the episode where we just trash talk each other's curries. It starts off with my wife Camille, and she has an Indian curry, a chicken curry, and then across the way is our neighbor who has a curry chicken. All right. And then my mom walks in with a gariga and says, "Don't even talk. Both of yours look and smell disgusting. Mine's the best." No one, like, you know what I mean? Like, people talk about in like current day, you can't do comedy the same. And I'm like, no, we did an episode where we trash talked each other's curries, and no one had a problem. You know why? Because we grounded it in something. And people are like, yeah, I remember teaching in high school, and the kids would come in and argue about whose food was the best because we were so ride or die about our curries. And I wrote the episode just because I wanted Gariga on set. I just wanted all the curries on set. But yeah, I'm so excited for them to see, and like I'm so proud that the network, like, we never got pushback on those things. Like, they've been so supportive in letting us make a show like this.
Yeah, it's a new day and age. It's like we are. It's good to be Vietnamese today. I think it's a great
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see an influx of some Vietnamese projects coming through soon, and I think there's so much to be proud of. There's so much to spotlight. But I also think that when a lot of our parents and grandparents came to this country, they had a lot of trauma they carried with them. And so at times the Vietnamese community can be closed off. I think for a lot of us, we kind of just try to blend in, and like just put our head down and work. And I
Yeah.
think we're at a really special point now where we can hold our head up high for what we have gone through and what our children have accomplished, you know? And that's what makes me proud, like seeing what you're doing and how you spotlight my fellow Vietnamese siblings and what they're doing. And that makes me so proud. And I love seeing that, and like being connected to larger Vietnamese matrix,
And I wanted to bring up these comedian groups in East Coast, West Coast. So have you heard of um, Fred Lay and Andy Van? They do Embarrassed by Night. It's a play on Paris by Night.
They do. What's Embarrassed by Night?
Embarrassed by Night is a night where they just bring on like 7 to 10 Vietnamese comedians and they just go crazy. So it's a show. It's just a comedy night that they bring up all these stand-up guys throughout the Vietnamese comedy world. And it's all
Yeah.
English. It's all done in English because all these guys are born in America. So it's these two guys, Fred Lay and Andy Van, that do Embarrassed by Night. And then they do another show for like more Pan-Asian, like Asian Americans, called 626 Laugh Market. It's a play off the 626 Night Market out here in
Yeah.
California. So they do these two shows. One's all Vietnamese and then the other one's Asian American. And that would be cool just to see you come down to do one of these events with them, to do a
You gotta
stand-up.
set that up, man. I would love to. Whenever there's an opportunity to be in a
In
room full of Asians doing comedy, I love it. And like Embarrassed by Night is so great because you say Petty Panay to anybody and they know right
Get it.
away.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
I could see it'd be trippy for you to be in a room with hundreds of Vietnamese or hundreds of Asian Americans in here in California. It's a trippy thing.
I don't want to give away a lot, but in season 2, we introduced the California Vietnamese cousins. And I've always said the Cali Viet are like on another level. They got Lil Saigon. Because like in Canada, the Vietnamese population is like spread out. And so because there's a lot less of us, we didn't have like these little communities that popped up.
Right.
And so that's why you'll find like a random banh mi shop in like Saskatoon, like this rural city, And I'm always like, whoa, where'd this banh mi shop come from? And what happens is it's like one family that moved to Saskatoon, and then this is what they opened up, right? And the community supported them. But like, yeah, like in California, in Cali, like, and I knew about this in like '01 when Asian Avenue popped up.
Yeah.
And Asian Avenue, you're introduced to like all the Asians in North America, and it was all Cali Asians. And they just like lived a life. There's a style, there's a musical genre, the import car scene, all those things. And I'm learning about that now through like just wonderful like Instagram accounts and connecting to that community. But like, yeah, we introduced the Cali cousins, and it was like a joy. So yeah, our exec at CBC is half Vietnamese, and so she's on board with all the jokes. Though one time I did put in a "numa" into a script, and she's like, Andrew, though I appreciate the sentiment, you know full well we cannot air this at 8:30 on television. And so she caught me in it, right? But yeah, it's like the Vietnamese and regions different, which is interesting because like a lot of the clips from the show have gained momentum on TikTok and social media. And like one clip in particular was just was a little bit polarizing because they'd be like we're arguing, my family's arguing, my parents and I. And one person comment, like people were just commenting like, oh my god, this is real life, this is it for us. And one person comments like, oh, these Vietnamese don't argue like the Vietnamese I know. And I'm like, wow, it looks like you're from California. Well, we're up in Canada, so we don't argue the same way. And I'm like, that in itself is like in order for us to truly represent our community,
Yeah.
we actually need to understand that Vietnamese in North America is a varied thing. There's a range of how we are, and the Vietnamese in Vietnam will look at the Vietnamese in North America and be like, what are you talking about? You're not Vietnamese. Like we're the Vietnamese. So even within that, our culture has changed, because when we got to this country, we were spread out. We went to all these places either for work, or we were sponsored to go to these places, or we had like one random family member there. And so it evolves. So like my family fights a bit differently than other families, which has been interesting dissecting.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we are dissecting this, because East Coast Vietnamese versus West Coast Vietnamese are very different people, very different. And it boils down to something very simple. When you're an East Coast Vietnamese, chances are you did not grow up around a lot of Vietnamese or Asians, so you had to really grow a thicker skin, and you had to combat the outside forces of other people that were not Vietnamese, that did not look like you. When you're in Orange County or California, Southern California especially, there's strength in numbers, so you can live within your community and then like explore outside. But chances are there's very little of kind of bumping heads that you do in the East Coast. And the East Coast, because of the weather, because of whatever it is, people are just, they grind harder, they go out and drink more, they're just hardcore, more hardcore. When the East Coast Vietnamese come out to LA, and especially in the entertainment industry, these guys just tear it up out here because they just work harder, they're just more well-read, they go to better schools. And this is all a gross generalization for sure, but if you really analyze like the guys who really kick ass, really take names, it's really the guys that are from the East Coast that really just trump, man. They kill it out here.
And what I always go back to is I remember the first season of Kim's Convenience. There was like a YouTuber, and they had watched the first 2 or 3 episodes, and they did not like the show. They're like, this is not how Asian people act. This is not how Koreans act. This is not it. He posted a response like a few months later. He's like, I finished the season. And he said, I was wrong. This isn't how my family acts, but that doesn't mean this isn't a Korean family. And he's like, I understand now that this is someone's interpretation of their family, the family they create. In order for our culture to proceed and to be able to tell our stories, we have to acknowledge that there are variations of how our stories exist. It's like white people don't watch Friends and be like, that is not how white people are. Like, they don't do that.
No.
They just accept, oh, that's one group of friends. They're not my friends. They might be my friends, and they leave it there, right? That's kind of how we have to let ourselves be.
There's an allowance of a plenitude attitude, an attitude of plenitude for white people to say whatever and have whatever stories they have. But it's not okay when there's a plenitude of Vietnamese stories out there and people. But I think the root of all of this is because people are just like, fuck, I wish they told my story. You know what I mean? In their own brain, they're just like, they're hating because they want their story. Everybody wants their Vietnamese story version to be out in the world and not some other families or not some other version of the Vietnamese way of life. But we all know that even in Vietnam, there's a million different ways Vietnamese people live. It's not a monolith anywhere we go.
Yeah. It's disrespectful that we think it is.
Yeah.
That there are 200 plus million Vietnamese and that it boils down to one story for them. It's not like that, and so for our show, like, I tried to find what are the things relatable to me. Our cultural consultant Vinh Nguyen is also my cousin, but my cousin, who firstly, he's a professor in refugee studies and gender studies. He's a 10-year professor, and like I'm so in awe. He's like the cousin that everyone should be talking about. They talk about me sometimes. They're like, "Oh, because he's on TV," but I'm like, "No, it's Vin, man. Vin's where it's at." Wow. But Vin came to Canada when he was like older, and so he has this understanding. So like, I'll talk to Vin about like nuances, and we were like working together on this script because I'm trying to like find this nuance for how our approach is. But it's the idea came from asking the actress that plays my sister. And like the funny thing there is like I have to like try to keep tabs. She auditioned to play another character on the show. Great audition. And I looked at her last name and I was like, oh, that's a Vietnamese last name. I bet you she's Viet and she speaks it too. And so when she didn't get the other role, I'm like, bring her in to play my sister.
Wow.
Brought her in. And so this was based on me asking her, what do you want from your character? And she's like, well, Andrew, like, my brother's a lawyer, my other brother's a doctor, and they both married lawyers and doctors. We have enough doctors in the family that we could open up our own private clinic. And then me, musical theater. And she's like, I want to do an episode based on this thing. And I was like, got it. And so it's just like, for me, it's like finding stories that connect to me, but then also the performers that are part of my family. And I'm very proud whenever there's a clip that kind of blows up. People are just like, oh, their accents are really good. I'm like, yeah, because we're all Viet, And then, but my son is not Viet on the show. He plays half Vietnamese, half Indian, which is like a really hard thing. But he's Filipino, and someone made a comment. They're like, his pronunciation is not so great. I'm like, yeah. It's almost as if he's a kid who Vietnamese isn't his first language, right?
That's normal. It's exactly,
normal.
Yeah, of course, his Vietnamese is not going to be great. It's normal. That's the way it is.
Yeah. And so I'm like, but that's part of the journey as well, because he will represent a generation of Vietnamese kids whose parents are Vietnamese or they're part Vietnamese, because they're third or fourth generation now, and they don't know the language. And it's one of those things, unless you go to unless you go to those schools, right? You don't quite get a grasp of it, especially in North America. So yeah. I've been reading Vietnamese books to my son, and I'm like, oh damn, your Vietnamese is getting pretty good. Like, we gotta like up the ante. But then like for me, upping the ante actually requires me to learn more Vietnamese.
Are you ever going to get into the feature film space?
It's always on the table. Like, I'm always happy to do so. And like, I finished 2 movies this year. I did one with Olivia Chang from Warrior. I'm really excited about. That's a drama feature, directed by an emerging Asian Canadian director. I did another silly comedy this year. Written by one of my.
You've done 2 films.
2 films this year alone.
Oh shit!
So yeah, I usually do like 1 or 2 movies a year.
You're moving into the movie space.
Yeah, like it's always been part of it, like it's always been part of it. But I've always just been so busy with TV, and so I haven't stopped working. Like, literally, the last 3 years, I went from Kim's to Run the Burbs. I shot another show called LOL that was one of Amazon Prime's most highest viewed series. It was like a reality show where if you make a comedian laugh, they're eliminated. Me, Tom Green, Colin Mockery, and it was like the Canadian All Stars. Finished third. Look, I'll take that. I lost to Colin Mockery and Tom Green.
That's
this
cool.
little Asian kid from Calgary went toe to toe with those guys.
Yeah.
With honor. And I'm never gonna beat those guys. They're legends, but like it was an honor. And then I went to do more Run the Burbs. And so for me, what I'm most excited about is like my career is just like I feel like it's just getting started.
Yeah. Just started.
It's getting started. And I look at Paul Sun-Young Lee. Appa. He's in Star Wars now. He's in Last Airbender. He's from Calgary, like me. And I remember when we auditioned, he asked me, he's like, afterwards, like, hey, where are you from? I'm like, oh, from Calgary. He's like, oh, you're from Calgary. He had to leave Calgary to build his career. I got to build my career in Calgary. But in a lot of ways, Paul's just getting started. Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't compare myself to the standard equation of overnight success, because for me, it's always success to me is being able to take my kids to the movies and, to be able to like have dinner. But like, isn't that success what our parents wanted it to be?
Beyond
like,
it.
Our parents' success was if they could take us to McDonald's on a Friday night. Right? Like, just to be able to pay the bills, to get a new Honda Accord, like that was their idea of success. And I do connect back to that because that is the most important thing for me, success for my family.
I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the sneakers that you have on the wall back there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you are part of a community of sneakers and young people. You started or you're co-founding, you're involved in something called YYC Soldiers, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
It was a sneaker group I started up in 2012 with some buddies. We were just like, we'd met up in the sneaker lineups, big into sneakers. I started this group up, organized some events, and then like we made enough money at the events to kind of start a business with it. And so they're running it now, but like it's super cool like who they're working with. They're working with eBay sneakers. They're working with like on a national level. And we just like do these fun sneaker meetups. And so sneakers was very much something that was I connected to. I started doing comedy, and it's become a big part of like my persona. But it's also like, how I said improv was the thing that wasn't school. Well, when improv became my job, I needed a thing that wasn't improv and comedy. So sneakers became that. Sneakers and pro wrestling became that. And I am excited to say I got Air Force malt in season 2 of Run the Burbs. Like we put that into the script.
Was that Subdoc? Where's that from?
Oh yeah, that's Subdoc all day long. Subdoc did it. Oh, got the Air Force mode on feet. And so I took that and we put it in the show. And so my cousin comes on, my cousin Tyson comes on. He's like, oh, got the Air Force mode on feet. And so, I'm trying to I'm looking at like Vietnamese culture and trying to like find those things that kind of connect us all into it, bring that into it. Yeah,
that's beautiful, because the traditional way of a person in the United States, Vietnamese American, when we think about our language, our puns, it was never funny. We would never think of it as being funny to the outside world. But here you are flipping that script a bit and saying, you know what, I'm going to bring it into the mainstream and I'm going to make it funny. I'm going to make it not only funny for us, but make it funny for all of you out there too.
Yeah, like there's a scene in season 1 with me and my dad, and I'm trying to speak to him about like a really touchy subject, but my Vietnamese is so bad that I can't quite say it right. And so you watch me spiral with Vietnamese. There's like a joy in that, because firstly, it used to be a place of embarrassment.
Yeah.
That we weren't able to communicate with our elders and aunts and uncles properly. But like for me, I take that as a source of like comedy, and it's a source of like, yeah, man, it's who we are. Let's lean into it. So I try to lean into the things that are relatable. I try to lean into those lean into those moments, and even within our music, like we've been able to source really amazing music. Like we got Suboy, she gave us some tracks for the show.
Shout out to
And
Suboy. Suboy's
yeah,
a female rapper in Vietnam.
some people are saying that she's a Nicki Minaj of Vietnam, and her music videos are like beautiful. They're like
Yeah.
arts works of art, like they're so visual. Or like there was one where like there's a song we were trying to source for the second season, and the chorus was like "Danadi," and so I always listen to the lyrics. I don't want like violent or misogynistic lyrics. Like I really broke the song down. I'm like, "Danadi" is like hit him now, and I'm like, okay, hear me out. I sat down with the our entire EP team. I'm like, you could argue it's like hit someone now, but is it also like you gotta hit it now?
Yeah.
Because if this was an American song, it was like you gotta hit it now. We'd be like, yeah, this is a club anthem.
Yep.
And so I love that there's a scene where you hear "Danadi" in the background because we've turned like we taken Vietnamese hip hop, and and I'm like, look, at the end of the day, a banger's a banger regardless of the language. And I remember like really sitting down, like break because every Vietnamese track, hip hop, I break down the lyrics to make sure they're appropriate for network television. But that one brought me so much joy. So I'm like, it's been such a joy looking at like our culture, learning it, refreshing my memory, working with Vin on the cultural specificity on it, because I don't know it all, and the way I do things is different. This is a tangent, but I remember I made a TikTok about that one year and how much I missed it. It was COVID, but I called it Lacey. I said, "Oh, I miss Lacey this year." Someone went on and was like, "You're such a disappointment. It's that. Why are you calling it Lacey?" And I was like, "Oh, damn!" And I thought back, I'm like, I've called it Lacey my whole life. Like my mom and dad be like, "Oh, we're gonna go nhà bà ngoại làm lì xì hôm nay." We called it lì xì. And I'm like, you're an Asian, you're a Vietnamese person in another country, in another city, and you're criticizing me for how I have lived culture, And we're both right. you know we're both right, because every family has their own tradition, every culture has become its own thing in different places, right? So for me, in making this show, it's finding the specificity for this family and making sure it works for them. It can't be all families, but yeah, working with Vin has been really interesting. And like,
but what a beautiful story, this Lisi, because what it shows is the interpretation of everybody who thinks about a certain thing like Lisi, and that that correlation, I mean, that just goes together perfectly. And there's nothing wrong with a young person thinking of, like, I can imagine my kids thinking about the red envelope at every that, and Lisi is part of that cultural aspect. And to name it Lisi Day is sort of apt. It falls in line. But now having a show that talks about all these little vignettes of our culture that's being translated and picked up in a different way, in different viewpoints of it, just helps perpetuate that we are a variety of Vietnamese all over the world. We see things that could be culturally relevant, but we just see it in a different way. And seeing the idea of the Day of Tet as Lisi is so valid. And I think that this should be a practice that we in the Vietnamese media should be talking constantly about, how we reinterpret things that are in our culture. We should be able to see that as Lisi, because it's joyful to think of these little red envelopes bringing little packets of joys to our little kids.
Yeah. It's something I've firstly, every sitcom does a Christmas episode. We do not. We do that episodes.
Wow.
I'm writing the third season. We've had one every season.
Wow.
We do that every season. And so I'm like, that is the opportunity of this show. Like for us to do a Christmas episode, there's an opportunity there, but the opportunity of doing that, doing Raksha Bandhan, doing Holi, doing an Indian Vietnamese wedding, that is greater because very few shows have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So doing a that episode every season has been exciting. The learning about it, the decor, the wardrobe, the games. Like I remember having to describe Bakakaka to the props department and being like, all right, it's this board and there's 6 animals on it, right? And there's these dice, and then playing the game with the kids and my parents and my wife on the show, and people being like, oh, this is a fun game. I'm like, right? This is a very fun game. Don't play it often. You will lose money.
Does your wife's storyline in the show come off as 50-50? The Indian storyline?
Yeah, like it's something I know. In the first season, it leaned a bit more on the Vietnamese storyline, but season 2 was more Indian stories. We try to balance it out. But with my wife, her journey is with food and her mother, and her mother passed away when she was at a young age. And for my wife, Camille, it's a journey of discovering her recipes through food. And for Andrew, having a sister that is the perfect child. Andrew lives in her shadow, right? Because Carol's a doctor. And so we explore that and we see my parents. But yeah, it's 50-50 for sure. And I think even 50-50 with overlap. In season 2, we do, we have a beautiful wedding, and it shows both cultures. And that's been really exciting to see how those cultures are similar and complement one another. And it's funny, I just shared it on my Instagram today. Someone tagged me, and it was photos from a wedding for like Toronto Life, and it was an Asian Indian wedding. And then someone said it was Run the Burbs in real life, and I'm like, yes, it's Run the Burbs in real life, because as our time in North America continues and we grow and evolve and get married and find each other, right? There's a lot in common between Asian and South Asian cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. What inspired you to come up with Run the Burbs?
While making Kim's Convenience, I always wondered what would happen if Kimchi and Janet and Jung, when they become parents. And I felt like the immigrant experience was something we had seen in storytelling, but we didn't see what would happen if like second generation Canadians are parents. And I will say that Andrew Pham, as a father, is an Asian father who tells his kids he loves them repeatedly too much. He's overcompensating for when his parents didn't tell them they loved him growing up. So we raise our kids differently than our parents do. And I want to reflect that. And I want to reflect this in the suburbs, because the suburbs are often, when they're depicted very bland and mundane, and often very white. They've erased us from the suburbs, but if you go to any suburb in any major city, we run those suburbs. Like oftentimes you go to a suburb, it's only us, right? And so I felt that was an opportunity to do that. And so that's kind of how the story, the idea came together, and it was quite, it was a smooth process developing it.
And it wasn't that hard to get it greenlit?
Well, I think everything is hard to get greenlit. I think it's like a challenge, but I think for us, we were very fortunate that the idea was strong from the beginning. We had an amazing team putting it together, and the network believed in us. And so it was pretty smooth. Like I'm very thankful for that process.
So Andrew, let's remind the audience, July on the CW, Run the Burbs is going to come out the first season or the second? How is this schedule?
They're going to air it from the beginning. They're going to air season 1. We're on at 8:30s on Mondays on the CW. It's got a wonderful lineup of Son of a Critch, which is a fellow CBC show, and then right after us, a show called Children and Everything, another fellow Canadian show, the Canadian Power Hour of comedy. The 3 shows. I'm so excited to be bringing the show to the US, and I wanted to make a show that just showed us and the children of immigrants raising their kids. And it's a really feel good show. It's a feel good, happy show. And honestly, I wanted to make a show that wasn't rooted in our trauma,
Yeah,
because a
that's the
lot of our
beauty.
stories that are told often about our trauma,
Yeah. And
you
that's
know.
so important to move away from it. I stress that all the time. It's like it's good to kind of know about it, and it's good to honor the generation that went before it. But I mean, I was born in the US, and I kind of have to live with my parents and that generation's trauma. But enough of it for me, because I need to
Mhm.
move on, and I need to live and show my children that we can move away from trauma, and it's okay, it's in the background, but at the same time we should be able to kind of live funny moments and humorous storylines without the shadow of war.
Yeah, like my when I was in Vietnam with my dad in 2011, and he gave me this really sobering fact, because I was commenting like I had been in Vietnam in 2006, and then I was back there in 2011, and I was like, Dad, man, sounds like really changed. He's like, yeah, it's like rapidly industrializing. And I was like, wow. And he's like, well, 2/3 of the country were born after the war.
Yeah.
And it hit me, because we've been like, our only narrative in North America is often related to the war. But it's been so many years where 2/3 of the country born after the war. So they don't know that trauma. They're just trying to rapidly build the country to the powerhouse it can be, right? And it's the same way in North America, right? And my kids, even me, like, I didn't know what my mom
Yeah.
went through until very recently, because she never told me, because she didn't want me to carry that burden in my life. She's like, "What? I didn't want you to have that on your shoulders. You don't need to have it." And obviously now I know, and it gives me a greater appreciation, respect, and understanding of what she went through. But it is something on my mind. So I wanted to make a show that was um, about this family, about the suburbs, showing them living their best life. And I wanted it to, like, this was my favorite comment in the first episode. They're having a barbecue, and someone's like, "Oh man, like, if this family is supposed to be half Indian, where's like the Indian food? Like, it." And I was like, that in itself is a problem, because you're acting like we don't have hot dogs and hamburgers. Like, you think at a barbecue we have to have, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, no, like, I remember barbecues at my grandparents' house or my uncle's house, my bakwa's house, where it was just straight up hamburgers and hot dogs and beer.
Yeah.
It's like, or skewers as well, right? We love skewers. But I'm like, yeah, like, we can eat that too, like. And I was like, it's this thing where, like, we're programmed to think that in order for a story to be this culture, it has to be like,
Yeah.
boom, in your face. But like, for me, it's very much like hitting on the subtle moments of seeing this family living this life their way. And then when the culture plays a part into it, um we take the time to acknowledge that and explore that. But like, you're a father, right?
Yeah. I have two kids, 6 and 4.
Yeah, 2 kids. You don't wake up every day and say, man, I'm so Vietnamese, I'm gonna show the world how Vietnamese I am. No, you wake up, try to get your kids ready for school,
Yeah.
and you hope you put on pants. That's like your morning, you know. And so we all live the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's finding that balance.
How do we find it if we don't have CW? We're not on terrestrial radio or TV.
I can't say it yet, but it is going to a streamer afterwards,
Okay,
and I'm
great.
very excited. And so it's been really exciting seeing this show pick up, and to find homes for it in the US. And so right after it's done on the CW, there will be another announcement for it to go to a streamer, and I'm very excited. So
Yeah, I
but
am
yeah,
too. I'm so happy to hear that we'll be able to check it out. But it's great for the CW too to have this, and great for you to have it. Congratulations.
thank you. Look, you're the one who's lived in the US. I can't think of another sitcom that's
No,
centered around a Vietnamese family,
I don't even think that there was one before.
right?
I don't think that there's one before.
and Margaret Cho was like, Margaret Cho's show was always like the standard, and like that was the first time. And then from Margaret Cho's show was Fresh Off the Boat, Kim's Convenience. And since then, I feel like we've had others, Never Have I Ever. We've seen that, but like I always go back. I'm like, I can't quite think about it. And my good friend Jess Vu, who you are aware of, she I've asked her, I'm like, has there been another one? And that's why I'm really excited. But I do want to say, this is one Vietnamese family, one half Vietnamese family, led by a father who struggles with his Vietnamese identity because he was not the golden child. So it's their story. And so the part I hope, and what has happened with Kim's Convenience, is that it inspires a dialogue and it inspires more. And I will say, in season 2, when we were casting my Cali cousins, we were getting auditions from Dallas, New York, Atlanta, LA, all these performers trying to audition. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And they were like, Andrew, you don't understand, like, the idea that we get to audition for 2 fully fleshed out Vietnamese characters that are cousins, that are just wild and out, that are fun comedy. And I felt so bad because I was like, oh, we need it. So I'm hoping this creates the change, right? I'm hoping this gives us more opportunities to tell our stories that aren't rooted in the war and trauma, but are rooted very much in the now. Like the fact that Little Saigon doesn't have a sitcom, to me is a crime. Like
I don't
that
know,
in itself.
Yeah, I don't know why you're not doing Cali Cousins as the
the spinoff.
Yeah, the spinoff. The fucking name Cali Cousins itself. That's a funny shit, and we all know what that means, right? Like in the Vietnamese community, it's all those cousins that come from Cali are the ones that enough said, But that would be so interesting and fun to watch a spinoff called Cali Cousins. Shout out to Jess Vu. Jess Vu put that together with Andrew.
Yeah. Well, if I hope that the show gains ground and we're able to do stuff like that. But yeah, it's like it's we have lived another like big period of time where like we can mine our culture and our experiences in North America and find that. Because like for me, that banh mi shop in Saskatoon, that in itself to me is a story. And our stories are like, why these random restaurants pop up. Like I was in Hamilton, Ontario, and I was like, I ordered Vietnamese from this random spot, and I was like, it is so good. And I ordered Vietnamese, and I was like, why? And someone told me, oh, there's a lot of Vietnamese immigrants that are in Hamilton. And I was like, why? They're like, oh, because housing prices were really cheap. And I'm like, yep, the suburbs of Toronto is where the Vietnamese are. So yeah, man, I hope it opens up more stories, and we're starting to see them. We're starting to see more of them pop up, and I get little whispers of like this is kind of happening here and there. But we got room to grow. We always got room to grow.
Andrew, I hope to see you in person one day in LA or in Calgary or Toronto. This was a blast to sit here and chat with you. And I waited a long time to get these schedules, in place. And I'm so grateful that, we had the time today and you've made the time. So thank you so much. And congratulations once again on all the success.
Thank you for being a leader in the Vietnamese community. Thank you for telling our stories in a second generation context. And hopefully Embarrassed by Night 2023, 2024, I get to come out and connect with the community. It would be a joy. You describing it gave me goosebumps.
I'll let the boys know. I'll let them
you
guys know. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.